Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Fireside Tales for Wolfgang, episode 47. Let's take a quick glance through the chat. Christina is here and driving, so she won't be typing much. Hello, Angelica. Hello, Meg. Diana, I hope you're still healing well. Kathy B. Angelica. Melissa Catano. My mom is here, logged in as Pearly Kitty. Hi, Dari. Oh, hi, Olive. Hi, Ray. Mao. That's adorable. That's just adorable. Hi, Casey. Woof. Hello, Amanda. Lovely show. I especially love that first Cyndi Lauper song. Amanda did a couple of them tonight, and Time After Time. Man, it's just such a solid, wonderful song. Hello, Anna. Hi, Terry. Nick Davila. How you doing, man? Oh, and my chat just disappeared. Oh, there we go. Okay, good, Diana. I'm glad you're healing well. Almost completely healed. Wow, that's fast. It was like a week, right? Yes, Kathy B. I am in LA. I have decided to make the transition back to Los Angeles, albeit slowly. I'm not doing it all at once. As a matter of fact, next week, I'm going to travel a little bit in a very safe, very, very outdoors sort of way. I'm going to go camping. I've not taken an actual proper vacation, literally in years. And so I am going to take off and go camping in Nevada. So thank you. I wish I could say it's nice to be back to LA. Hopefully it will be nicer soon. I have no complaints though. I've got a nice place to come back and actually live. So, doing better than most people in the world with respect to that. Here's a funny little fact. If ever I'm feeling any kind of down or like, oh, poor me, for whatever reason, we all do that from time to time, obviously, right? I was talking to an anthropologist a couple of years ago who dropped a little fact that just stunned me. She said, only 1 in 3 people on the face of the earth have access to a flushing toilet. I mean, that should be mind-blowing. If you just take a moment to parse all the places in Africa, all the places in like rural China, hell, maybe a lot of places in mainland China. Just all the places all over the world, really. This is distributed amongst a global population, this little fact. Only 1 in 3 people have access to a flushing toilet. And I guess what's mind-blowing is that I have my own toilet, right? I mean, from like a global scale of like how good or bad do you have it, how much better would you like it? Do you have a toilet? Because if the answer is yes, you're doing better than most people. Yeah, it puts a lot of things in perspective. I mean, not only just from the obvious comfort level and that which is included in the privacy of having access to a flushing toilet, but just from a perspective of hygiene and life expectancy. This is one of the things that I understand Bill Gates is actively involved in Africa, is bringing more flushing toilet systems to far-reaching third world countries sort of conditions. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, in just trying to make the world a better place and prevent the spread of disease and raise the quality of life, raise the life expectancy amongst as many human beings as they can positively impact. Like, one of the things that they're doing is coming up with flushable toilet systems. Nick, you got 3. Yeah, man, doing great. That is fabulous. Hi, Katie. Welcome. We're talking about toilets and how glad we are to have access to them, much less those of us that are extremely fortunate to have our own. Have I talked about this before? I see we're talking about flushing toilets again this week. I wouldn't be surprised if I brought that factoid up in the past, because that is so mind-boggling. I just, yeah, wow. Yeah, it's just, holy crap. Holy crap, what a apt expression. So, yeah, I'd put, who did I put on the, I put a different author on the thumbnail this week. I decided kind of last minute that I'm going to change tonight's short story. Oh, last week we talked about why toilets flush the other way. Right, okay, right. Yeah, okay. Obvious. I was thinking more of that along the lines of like hydrodynamics, and seems like there might be a different, deeper question in there about the polarity of a water molecule that turns out to be not applicable. So yes, we were actually talking about toilets last week. Yeah, composting toilets, very good idea. Very great idea for rural areas. However, I've got absolutely no insight to back this up, but I would imagine, in terms of just basic sanitation and hygiene, that a composting toilet, ecologically efficient as it may be, probably pales in comparison to an actual running water flushing toilet. In any case, I saw like a 5-second thing on the design of these toilet systems that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is researching to put in third world countries. So I'm not privy to any of the details of how they work, except that it was really just going for hygiene. Yeah, with a composting toilet, you wouldn't need to pump in water. That's, yeah, I see the distinct advantage in that. And it's composting, so it's a circle of life, or more like the nitrogen circle. It will be good for growing food if implemented properly. So, yeah, I started to say I changed my mind at the last minute as to what the short story of the evening would be, just because it's kind of taking emotional stock with how I was feeling this evening, this afternoon, and I thought I would personally benefit a little more from reading an excerpt from Walden. Walden is just one of those great works that I have sometimes in the past found great solace in, great inspiration in. And so got a little section out of Walden from chapter 5 called Solitude. This is abridged slightly, but I hope we all get something out of this. And then at the conclusion, we'll move into a couple of audience questions. From Walden by Henry David Thoreau, chapter 5. This piece is called Solitude. This is a delicious evening, when the whole body is one sense, and imbibes delight through every pore. I go and come with a strange liberty in nature, a part of herself. I gotta read that again already. I go and come with a strange liberty in nature, a part of herself. As I walk along the stony shore of the pond in my shirt sleeves, though it is cool as well as cloudy and windy, and I see nothing special to attract me, all the elements are unusually congenial to me. The bullfrogs trumpet to usher in the night, and the note of the whippoorwill is borne on the rippling wind from over the water. Sympathy with the fluttering alder and poplar leaves almost takes away my breath, yet, like the lake, my serenity is rippled, but not ruffled. These small waves raised by the evening wind are as remote from storm as the smooth, reflecting surface. Though it is now dark, the wind still blows and roars in the wood. The waves still dash, and some creatures lull the rest with their notes. The repose is never complete. The wildest animals do not repose, but seek their prey now. The fox and the skunk and rabbit now roam the fields and woods without fear. They are nature's watchmen, links which connect the days of animated life. When I return to my house, I find that visitors have been there and left their cards, either a bunch of flowers or a wreath of evergreen, or a name in pencil on a yellow walnut leaf, or a chip. They who come rarely to the woods take some little piece of the forest into their hands to play with, by the way, which they leave either intentionally or accidentally. One has peeled a willow wand, woven it into a ring, and dropped it on my table. I could always tell if visitors had called in my absence, either by the bended twigs or grass or the print of their shoes, and generally of what sex or age or quality they were, by some slight trace left as a flower dropped or a bunch of grass plucked and thrown away, even as far off as the railroad 1/2 mile distant, or by the lingering odor of a cigar or pipe. Nay, I was frequently notified of the passage of a traveler along the highway 60 rods off by the scent of his pipe. I have to point out as a sidebar here, on a personal note, I found myself having the exact same experience as this in the mountains in Big Bear. Not because I am interning under some mystical Native American tracker that shows me the way of the wolf, the boar, and the print of the deer, but more because I've become so intimately acquainted with the mountain itself, with the ecosystem, with the forest, with the animals that live there, with the plants, that when something is slightly out of place, it now jumps out to me. It jumps out to me like a $20 bill on the sidewalk. When there is an animal that lives on the other side of the mountain from where I'm standing, and I hear that animal's alarm call, it jumps out to me as something that is temporarily out of place. And very much is the same for human-based smells, such as cigarette smoke, cigars and pipes, not so commonly, but I can't not notice these things now. Back to Walden. There is commonly sufficient space about us. Our horizon is never quite at our elbows. The thick wood is not just at our door, nor the pond, but somewhat is always clearing, familiar and worn by us, appropriated and fenced in some way and reclaimed from nature. For what reason have I this vast range and circuit some square miles of unfrequented forest? For my privacy, abandoned to me by men? My nearest neighbor is a mile distant, and no house is visible from any place but the hilltops within 1/2 mile of my own. I have my horizon bounded by woods all to myself. A distant view of the railroad where it touches the pond on the one hand, and of the fence which skirts the woodland road on the other. But for the most part, it is as solitary where I live as on the prairies. It is as much Asia or Africa as it is New England. I have, as it were, my own sun and moon and stars, and a little world all to myself. At night, there was never a traveler passed by my house or knocked at my door, more than if I were the first or last man, unless it were in the spring, when at long intervals some came from the village to fish. They plainly fished much more in the Walden pond of their own natures, and baited their hooks with darkness. But they soon retreated, usually with light baskets, and left the world to darkness and to me. And the black kernel of the night was never profaned by any human neighborhood. I believe that men are generally still a little afraid of the dark, though the witches are all hung and Christianity and candles have been introduced. Yet, I experienced sometimes that the most sweet and tender, the most innocent and encouraging society may be found in any natural object, even for the poor misanthrope and the most melancholy man. There can be no very black melancholy to him who lives in the midst of nature and has his senses still. There was never yet such a storm, but it was Aeolian music to a healthy and innocent ear. Nothing can rightly compel a simple and brave man to a vulgar sadness. For all the while that I enjoy the friendship of the seasons, I trust that nothing can make life a burden to me. The gentle rain water, which waters my beans and keeps me in the house today, is not too drear and melancholy, but good for me too. Though it prevents my hoeing them, it is of far more worth than my hoeing. If it should continue so long as to cause the seeds to rot in the ground and destroy the potatoes in the lowlands, it would still be good for the grass on the uplands. And being good for the grass, it would be good for me. Sometimes, when I compare myself with other men, it seems as if I were more favored by the gods than they, beyond any deserts that I'm conscious of. As if I had a warrant and surety at their hands, which my fellows have not, and were especially guided and guarded. I do not flatter myself, but if it be possible, they flatter me. I've never felt lonesome or in the least oppressed by a sense of solitude. But once, and that was a few weeks after I came to the woods, when for an hour I doubted if the near neighborhood of man was not essential to a serene and healthy life. To be alone was something unpleasant, but I was at the same time conscious of a slight insanity in my mood and seemed to foresee my recovery. In the midst of a gentle rain, while these thoughts prevailed, I was suddenly sensible of such sweet and beneficent society in nature, in the very pattering of the drops, and in every sound and sight around my house. An infinite and unaccountable friendliness, all at once like an atmosphere sustaining me, has made the fancied advantages of human neighborhood insignificant, and I have never thought of them since. Every little pine needle expanded and swelled with sympathy and befriended me. I was so distinctly made aware of the presence of something kindred to me, even in scenes which we are accustomed to call wild and dreary, and also that the nearest of blood to me and humanness was not a person nor a villager, that I thought no place could ever be strange to me again. Some of my pleasantest hours were during the long rainstorms in the spring or fall, which confined me to the house for the afternoon, as well as the forenoons soothed by their ceaseless roar and pelting, when an early twilight ushered in a long evening in which many thoughts had time to take root and unfold themselves. In those driving northeast rains, which tried the village houses so, when the maids stood ready with mop and pail in front entries to keep the deluge out, I sat behind my door in my little house, which was all entry, and thoroughly enjoyed its protection. In one heavy thunder shower, the lightning struck a large pitch pine across the pond, making a very conspicuous and perfectly regular spiral groove from top to bottom, an inch or more deep and 4 or 5 inches wide, as you would groove a walking stick. I passed it again the other day and was struck with awe on looking up and beholding that mark, now more distinct than ever, where a terrific and restless bolt came down out of the harmless sky 8 years ago. Men frequently say to me, "I think you would feel lonesome down there and want to be nearer to folks, rainy and snowy days and nights especially." I'm tempted to reply to such, this whole earth which we inhabit is but a point in space. How far apart, think you, dwell the two most distant inhabitants of yonder star, the breadth of whose disk cannot be appreciated by our instruments? Why should I feel lonely? Is not our planet in the Milky Way? This which you put seems to me not to be the most important question. What sort of space is that which separates a man from his fellows and makes him solitary? I have found that no exertion of the legs can bring two minds much nearer to one another. What do we want most to dwell near to? Not to many men, surely. The depot, the post office, the bar room, the meeting house, the schoolhouse, the grocery, Beacon Hill, or the 5 points where men most congregate, but to the perennial source of our life, whence in all our experience we have found that to issue as the willow stands near the water and sends out its roots in that direction, this will vary with different natures, but this is the place where a wise man will dig his cellar. I, one evening, overtook one of my townsmen who has accumulated what is called a handsome property, though I never got a fair view of it, on the Walden Road driving a pair of cattle to market. He inquired of me how I could bring my mind to give up so many of the comforts of life. I answered that I was very sure I liked it passably well. I was not joking. And so I went home to my bed and left him to pick his way through the darkness and the mud to Brighton, or Bright Town, which place he would reach sometime in the morning. Any prospect of awakening or coming to life to a dead man makes indifferent all times and places. The place where that may occur is always the same and indescribably pleasant to all our senses. For the most part, we allow only outlying and transient circumstances to make our occasions. They are, in fact, the cause of our distraction. Nearest to all things is that power which fashions their being. Next to us, the grandest laws are continually being executed. Next to us is not the workman whom we have hired, with whom we love so well to talk, but the workman whose work we are. I find it wholesome to be alone the greater part of the time. To be in company, even with the best, is soon wearisome and dissipating. I love to be alone. I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude. We are, for the most part, more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our chambers. A man thinking or working is always alone. Let him be where he will. Solitude is not measured by the miles of space that intervene between a man and his fellows. The really diligent student in one of the crowded hives of Cambridge College is as solitary as a dervish in the desert. The farmer can work alone in the field or the woods all day, hoeing or chopping, and not feel lonesome because he is employed. But when he comes home at night, he cannot sit down in a room alone at the mercy of his thoughts, but must be where he can see the folks and recreate and, as he thinks, remunerate himself for his day's solitude. And hence he wonders how all the student can sit alone in the house all night and most of the day without ennui and the blues. But he does not realize that the student, though in his house, is still at work in his field and chopping in his woods as the farmer in his, and in turn seeks the same recreation and society that the latter does, though it may be a more condensed form of it. I can relate to this extremely poignantly because I can't enumerate the number of times that I've been in a city or on a stage in front of a really, 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 really big crowd, and yet feeling utterly alone, profoundly isolated. By contrast, the number of times that it was just me and Wolfgang in a cabin in the woods, and I never felt alone, and I didn't feel like I was robbed of good company. But back to Walden. I have a great deal of company in my house, especially in the morning when nobody calls. Let me suggest a few comparisons that someone may convey an idea of my situation. I am no more lonely than the loon in the pond that laughs so loud, or than Walden Pond itself. What company has that lonely lake, I ask, and yet it has not the blue devils, but the blue angels in it. In the azure tent of its waters, the sun is alone except in thick weather, when there sometimes appears to be two, but one is a mock sun. I am no more lonely than a single mullein or a dandelion in a pasture, or a bean leaf, or sorrel, or a horsefly, or a bumblebee. I am no more lonely than the Millbrook, or a weathercock, or the North Star, or the south wind, or an April shower, or a January thaw, or the first spider in a new house. I have occasional visits in the long winter evenings when the snow falls fast and the wind howls in the wood, from an old settler and original proprietor who is reported to have dug Walden Pond and stoned it and fringed it with pine woods, who tells me stories of old time and of new eternity, and between us we manage to pass a cheerful evening with a social mirth and pleasant view of things, even without apples or cider. A most wise and humorous friend whom I love so much, who keeps himself secret, and though he is thought to be dead, none can show where he is buried. An elderly dame, too, dwells in my neighborhood, invisible to most persons, in whose odorous herb garden I love to stroll sometimes, gathering simples and listening to her fables, for she has a genius of unequaled fertility, and her memory runs farther back than mythology, and she can tell me the original of every fable, and on what fact every one is founded. For the incidents occurred when she was young. A ruddy and lusty old dame, she delights in all weathers and seasons and is likely to outlive all her children yet. This indescribable innocence and beneficence of nature, of sun and wind and rain, of summer and winter, such health, such cheer they afford forever, and such sympathy have they ever with our race, that all nature would be affected, and the sun's brightness fade, and the winds would sigh humanely, and the clouds rain tears, and the woods shed their leaves, and put on mourning in midsummer, if any man should ever for a just cause grieve. Shall I not have intelligence with the earth? Am I not partly leaves and vegetable mold myself? What is the pill which will keep us well, keep us serene, keep us contented? Not my or thy great-grandfathers, but our great-grandmother Nature's universal vegetable, botanic medicines, by which she has kept herself young always, outlived so many in her day. For my panacea, instead of one of those quack vials of a mixture dipped from the Dead Sea, let me have a draught of undiluted morning air. Morning air. If men will not drink of this at the fountainhead of the day, why then we must even bottle up some of it and sell it in the shops for the benefit of those who have lost their subscription ticket to morning time in this world. But remember, it will not keep till noonday, even in the coolest cellar. But drive out the stopples long ere that and follow westward to the steps of Aurora. I'm no worshiper of Hygeia, who was the daughter of that old herb doctor Escapulus, and who is represented on monuments holding a serpent in one hand and in the other a cup out of which the serpent sometimes drinks, but rather of Hebe, cupbearer to Jupiter, who was the daughter of Juno and wild lettuce, and who had the power of restoring gods and men to the vigor of youth. She was probably the only thoroughly sound-conditioned, healthy, and robust young lady that ever walked the globe. And wherever she came, It was spring. Wow. Yeah, I think I needed to read that this evening. So, yeah, I need fresh morning air too. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so a couple of questions that folks have asked me over the last couple of weeks. Someone asked me at the beginning of August if I like to think about silly things and just let my mind wander. Now, the context that she was asking was in regards to astrology. Because she said with a simple disclaimer, I don't really believe it. I don't really take it seriously. I just like to, it's just kind of fun to let my mind wander through and see all the things that seem to apply. And I was a little taken aback. And as I put my finger on why I was slightly taken aback, it's because one of the things that I like to do personally is be as aware as possible of my own observation biases. I collect observation biases the way some people collect stamps. Because where I'm aware of my own observation biases, those are places that I must look closer in order to disabuse myself of as many false beliefs as possible and embrace as many true things, discernibly true things, as possible. And she wanted to know, do I have silly things that I like to let my mind wander around like that? And I don't know if this qualifies as a silly thing, but one of the things that I love to think about, because of the sheer stretch of imagination that it requires, is something called the Fermi paradox. So there was an Italian physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project. A little refresher on the United States history: the Manhattan Project was when in the early 40s we were working on atomic weapons. And Einstein would not participate. But the people, at least in the United States, who did participate, most of them were participating on the basis that if we don't get this, the Germans will. I don't know if they knew about the Holocaust yet, but they did know that Hitler was not the sort of dude that you want to have wielding the first atomic weapons. But back to the Fermi paradox. Enrico Fermi was an Italian physicist who was on our side, working with Americans and on the Manhattan Project. And he basically asked this very simple question, looking up into the night sky, hypothetically, and said, if the universe is so friendly and conducive to life, where is everybody else? Now, the funny thing about the Fermi paradox is that Fermi didn't think of it as a paradox at all. Fermi seems to have thought it was kind of an obvious question because space is so unimaginably big that if we live at the same time as another civilization, it's so damn far away we can't see each other, we can't talk to each other, we can't even know the other is a... Our galaxy alone, this is just our galaxy is about 100,000 light years across. So from one spiral arm to the, from one edge of the Milky Way to the other edge of the Milky Way, it takes light 100,000 years just across. So if there are other alien civilizations existing at the same time as us, and if we had something like a telescope that was powerful enough to see them, we would be seeing them 100,000 years ago and can't even send out a message like, hi, and expect that to get them to them in any time that they can respond and send a hi back sort of message, right? Now, that's just how big space is. Never mind also how deep time in our universe is. So, as staggeringly large as space is, it's even bigger in terms of age. So even if another civilization lived somewhere in our area of the same galaxy where some kind of communication would be feasible because they're that close, the chances that we're alive at the same time are astronomical. I mean, this is literally where we got the word astronomical. This is, right? And then the third thing that Fermi was thinking of is that life is probably, as a phenomenon, so extraordinarily unlikely, rare, maybe even singular, that he wasn't suggesting this to be a paradox at all. But what I personally like to do a lot, and have for several years, is just imagine answers to that question. If there are other life forms out there, why don't we see them? Why don't we hear from them? There are some really obvious answers. There are some answers that require a lot of thought. But the reason that I like to let my imagination run wild with this is because I like to imagine possible solutions to the Fermi paradox that are within the bounds of physical possibility, that which does not outrage logic and confound reason, that which does not defy physics, that which is physically allowable, and yet we still don't see or hear anyone. Why? I've got this book about 8 feet from me called 75 Solutions to the Fermi Paradox. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. I've probably thought of good 50 or 60 of them before ever opening this particular book. But man, is it still fascinating to read little details in. So, what is the Fermi paradox was just asked of me yesterday. And what do you like to let your imagination just kind of run with was asked at the beginning of August. So there's two questions with kind of the same answer. Katie was asking a specific bit about a week and a half ago. Katie was asking a larger question about the intersection of science and spirituality, and we started to get into that a little bit last week. Because before we can address the question, we've got to be much more specific about what do we mean by spirituality. And we had a whole discussion about that. One of the things that came up in the private messages of formulating the question, however, was, I think the way she phrased it is science being able to weigh the human spirit, I believe is how she phrased it. And I'm actually quite aware of the specific reference that this makes. In 1907, there was, I think he was a doctor. I don't think I'm pretty sure Duncan McDougall published a study in 1907. Oh, he was a physician from the East Coast. And McDougall had hypothesized that souls have an actual tangible weight, that upon death, this would be measurable. And he tried to do this. So he tried to get patients that were dying of things that were very fatiguing. So he wasn't looking at like seizure patients who are like moving around a lot as they die. He was looking at patients that are like slowly wasting away so as not to disrupt the scales. He was trying to be kind of careful. One of the measurements that he got in weighing people at the moment of death was one of his patients lost 21.3 grams. So, unfortunately, this is one of the sloppiest experiments perhaps ever performed in any kind of scientific environment. He had an extremely small sample size. He only had 6 patients. He only really got the measurements that he was looking for in one of those 6 patients. And what made it bad science was he found weak reasons to disregard all of the other conclusions that did not come to the evidence he was looking for, right? And he did try to propose a control. So because he was a Christian physician, this is where it gets really silly. Because he was a Christian, he also inferred that humans have souls and only humans have souls. So as a control, he weighed several dogs at the moment of death. Presumably he poisoned them. And when he could not make any of the dogs lose weight at the moment of death, he said, okay, this is confirming exactly what we would expect to see. Now we just have to see it in a few more humans. And this is actually, sometimes this is cited as selective reporting. So where you're cherry picking the results that you want to have in there. And so, but I don't know, maybe just because it's such an interesting premise, it became known, and it's still popularized as this 21-gram soul experiment. There was a movie that was made. I think I even saw the movie a decade or more ago. And in this, the movie, as I recall, the movie had like shockingly little to do with any of the things that I just now discussed. So it was like, it was kind of irrelevant. Okay, let me back up really quickly here in the chat and see. So what it amounted to, by the way, is essentially his scale that he was using to weigh bodies upon their death was sensitive enough to get fluctuations within grams, but under such sloppy conditions that some of the bodies actually gained weight upon their death, which was like, all right, that's clearly not, so it was all within a margin of error. That's the bottom line of this experiment, and that's why it's considered to be a terribly sloppy experiment. He was cherry-picking the data that would enforce or back up or support his conclusion, and he was disregarding the data that didn't, and all of his data could be simply explained as to being within the results, being within an error bar. David Benjamin says something to think about. Earth took 4 billion years to evolve intelligent life as we know it. That's about 1/3 the current age of the universe. If life elsewhere takes that long to evolve, ... Okay, I factually concur. And the early universe was much less hospitable to life, so maybe there just hasn't been enough time for intelligent life to evolve early enough that we'd see it now. Yeah, I totally concur. David is getting at one of the solutions to the Fermi paradox. Maybe there's lots of life out there. On Earth, the Earth has been around for about 4.5 billion years. Then the Earth has had life on it for about 3.5 billion years. And in that first 3.5 billion years, it was unicellular, one cell, oceans and oceans of simple blue-green algae, not even real bacteria yet. So maybe life is extremely common. But one of the great filters, we call this, is simple complexity. And then for the last 500 million years or so, life has gotten complex enough that we could have animals, that we could have plants, we could have things that move around on their own. But if it wasn't for a big rock that hit the Earth about 65 million years ago, I see absolutely no indication that the path the dinosaurs were on was going to result in anything intelligent. The fact that we have intelligent life here to even ponder the question was probably just a total quirk of luck. But that is kind of the story of biological evolution. Enough luck over enough time, and you don't hear from the ones that were not lucky enough to tell you of their non-existence. That would be observation bias. Let's see. Mom is saying, I just listened to a talk last night to a talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson and Richard Dawkins. Tyson talked about that. I'm assuming Mom was talking about the great filter, the Fermi paradox, and rareness of life, rareness of intelligence. Yeah. No, Katie, he definitely did not prove his theory very well. But you know what? That's the thing about good science. The reason that that McDougall's was not good science is that science never proves anything. A good experiment supports a conclusion, or a good experiment completely rules out, disproves a conclusion. I was, about a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago, I was comparing Einstein and Sigmund Freud. This wasn't a part of a conversation. This is just something I'm doing as I'm looking out the window, I guess. What I was pondering is that Sigmund Freud postulated a lot of weird stuff. It's Freud. A lot of stuff about sex with your mom and penises and Oedipal stuff and just, it seems when Freud was doing the biggest amount of his work that he was doing research, but when he was looking at studies, he was looking backward in time at data that seemed to confirm the conclusions that he was trying to go for. And so it seemed like he could have retrospectively justified just about anything that he could have come up with if he simply had enough time and enough imagination to come up with a justification for why, and thus I am correct because he was always looking backward. In contrast, Einstein came up with a test for general relativity that basically made a prediction that at the time of this particular eclipse, we are going to be able to see the light of a distant star that should not be visible from Earth during this eclipse. This star should be exactly blocked from the sun, from one edge of the sun, from where the Earth is. However, he was saying, if general relativity is correct, if my theory is correct, light from this star that should have gone off into space this way will bend around the sun and back to the Earth. The end result is that during this eclipse, when the sun is dimmed sufficiently, we will be able to see a star that is blocked by the sun as though that star is to the side of the sun. And we had to wait years to bear out the observation of this prediction. The difference between Einstein and Freud is that Einstein made a bold assertion, a prediction to the future. And if this is wrong, he is totally wrong. His theory is dead. It is disproven. It is absolutely just not there. On the other hand, if we see this star from around the sun, it doesn't conclusively prove him right, but it sure as shit supports what he was getting at. So we had a completely methodologically different approach than Freud took. Different kinds of science, different kinds of... No, I'm not even going to say that Freud was practicing a type of science. It makes, by these definitions, it makes Freud engaged in actual, definitive pseudoscience. So I think we'll cut it off there. As I said earlier in the show, I'm going to take a little vacation next week. So we will see you in 2 weeks. And if you're feeling so inclined, please drop something into the virtual tip jar over here. Got the Paymo and the VenPal. And also won't be doing the Lovecast this coming Thursday. We'll be out on the road. But thank you all very much for joining us. And don't forget Dancing with Dari tomorrow night on the Vaudacity Network, 6:30, I believe. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. I love you all. See you when I return.